So welcome to a bunch of short guys, and thank you for changing to our new temporary format as we all adjust to these new times. Thank you for joining me here in this quarantine art bunker in Dallas, Texas that I have going on. And we just wanted to make this new format online and reach out to the community. First, I want to introduce our co-host, Abby, over here, who's going to be chiming in with some knowledgeable thoughts as she normally does.
Good afternoon. Hi.
Hi, how you doing, Abby?
Doing great. How are you guys?
Good. And then up in the booth, we have Marshall and Ethan making sure it's stream. And then in the background, you might see my friendly cats popping in every now and then. So you guys can say hi. But really, the man of the hour that we have to talk about is the metal man himself, David Lesperance. David, why don't you say hi to the guys?
Hi, how's it going? Hopefully everyone can hear me.
Yep.
I got all my fans around me pointing at my computer, so hopefully it's not too loud.
Oh, no. You sound great. Thank you for being here, man.
No worries, no worries.
Get enough sleep?
I never get enough sleep.
Before we get into David's stuff, I just want to let you guys know that, this is basically a continuation of our monthly meetings that we normally do at Cullen College or throughout the Dallas Metroplex. And then, once this is all done, we're going to get back to hanging out with everyone, having some drinks. I can't wait for everyone just to buy me beers. That's always great. We'll get back to our studio tours like we were doing. And we will definitely be getting back into Industry Giants. Industry Giants will be happening this year. It won't be happening in this kind of capacity due to unforeseen circumstances and adapting to the new world. But this is the stuff that we were doing at Gillies. It's a big complex. We had artist alleys. This artist in particular was coming all the way from Greece. We had life drawing going on all day. And there's a bunch of friends and students coming to show off their artworks. We did live portfolio reviews all day long. It's a lot of fun. And we will be doing something like this online because here it is, guys, the Industry Giant 2020 poster. We don't have a speaker list yet. We're still finalizing things, but I thought it was super cool seeing these two robots coming together. Our good friend of the group, and I'll pull it up. So 15 tabs open. Our good friend Cameron Witt put this together for us over the course of the last couple months, and I think that, he's been doing a wonderful job. If y'all guys need any information about a bunch of short guys, feel free to go to our Facebook or go to our website at any time. You can chime us there. Those are the best ways to get a hold of us and ask any questions. Or if you got a specific topic that you might want to do, just let us know. With that said, also, I wanted to tell you right now on the stream, we do have our next month speaker, Nelson Lim, who will be speaking on basically being an FXTD for the last 10 years, for introducing us to Houdini and taking us through his best practices that he sees throughout the industry. With that all said, I think I'm gonna switch over to David. David, if you're ready, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and let you take some control over this.
Hey, hold up for just 1 minute.
Okay. Having technical difficulties.
Okay, now it's popping up now.
All right, let's see. Hopefully this shares. Is this working?
It is.
Excellent, excellent.
Yeah, so thank you for coming to do this for us.
No worries.
So this is your art station that we're looking at, right?
Yeah, I'm just going to kind of file through stuff and answer questions and chat and just have this kind of going in the background. The last I mean, probably actually since January, I've been pretty heads down, like in terms of like personal artwork. I'm focusing on migrating my mobile project over to like a next gen kind of space and getting all that stuff ramped up. So it's been quite an undertaking, but it's it's actually kind of cool to kind of go back. I was like, oh yeah, I miss doing all this, all these scenes and stuff. And I don't know. It's funny, like my over the years, my job's shifted so much from what I originally started doing. So it's kind of cool to kind of go back and see some of the older stuff. Like,
I was
man,
noticing your art stations just goes on forever. Yeah, I know so many other artists in our industry, they're so afraid about putting anything up there. But yours, I mean, I had a plethora of things to just kind of look at and go through. So I was like really appreciative that your stuff was out there and it was easy to find.
that's cool. Yeah. No, I mean, I have like this weird, like, it's funny because like, you know, people have different philosophies for like, you know, dealing with portfolios, dealing with, you know, business, the business aspects of kind of marketing yourself as an artist. And, you know, as you know, when it comes to personal art in particular, the stuff that like always has gotten me the most excited is kind of seeing the trajectory and the course of an artist over time. You know, I'm a big fan of like kind of seeing the really good stuff and the really bad stuff and everything else in between of an artist. I like to see the development and the growth. And that's kind of how I approach my art station. It's just kind of it's a splattering of pieces of things that I'm, you know, working on, you know, just like everybody else, you know, like there's a million plates in the air at all, you know, all the time. And, you know, you just kind of get to throw snippets up here and there occasionally. And it's fun. It's a lot of fun.
Before we get into what you're doing currently, can you tell me where you started? You know, what was like your first artistic expression? You know, or
Yeah. You know, so I grew up in Michigan. I grew up in kind of a few different areas, but I guess the closest big city for anyone who's interested is probably like Metro Detroit. But I grew up in a Oakland County, and you know, I kind of went through the path of not really knowing at all what I wanted to do for like every other young teenager. And it was right around the time when I was like 16, 17, or probably a little younger than that. You know, I was a typical Midwestern kid. I kind of got into a little bit too much trouble in school. And my parents got the suggestion that it probably makes a lot of sense to have me go to a vocational tech school because during, I'll just say there are some teachers that didn't want me in their class. So I ended up going to this vocational tech school, and it just happened to be I got dumped into a business class, and they had a bunch of, you know, Microsoft courses, you know, certification courses and business courses and that kind of stuff. And I was, you know, messing around with the stuff, and I, you know, was knocking out the certifications pretty quick. But I got really interested in kind of dismantling their systems, and they, you know, that which was actually what got me into that vocational stuff in the first place, because I was doing the same thing at my high school. And they you know, the guy who was running the class, the teacher, he's a really cool guy, and he's like, you know, you got a lot of energy. He's like, we need to funnel this though into something that's actually going to be remotely productive. And you know, I'm obviously a really big fan of heavy metal, and I've been a big fan of heavy metal since I was probably like 9 or 10. I think one of my first albums was like Iron Maiden's Killers, and I think I got that from one of my dad's friends when I was like maybe like 9 or 10. And he suggested that I join this art sector of the school. And I wasn't into graphic design. I wasn't into kind of the traditional art paths. And the teacher in the room was like, what are you interested in? And I was like, I like heavy metal and I like video games and I like to work out. She's like, okay, well, you can't work out because you're in school. But she's like, you know, we have this program, we don't know how it works. And it was 3ds Max 5. And she handed me a book that was probably about 5 inches thick. And she said, "Good luck." And she goes, "Oh, by the way, at the end of this end of the semester, if you don't have something to show, you're failing the class." So I was like, okay, that seems fair. And I went headfirst into 3ds Max, and it, that kind of pushed everything forward. During the that summer, so I was like 15 or 16 at the time. During that summer, I was working as a car porter, and I'm, you guys' show is a bunch of short guys. I am literally a very short guy, and in Michigan, big trucks, that's a, Metro Detroit. And, I was a car porter, and they'd have me they'd have me move all these cars that were, like these huge, huge, huge trucks. And I distinctly remember just absolutely thrashing this guy's, $70,000 or $80,000 truck, because I couldn't see over the wheel. Right.
Yeah.
And I was, I was walking through the parking lot, cleaning up stuff. And one of the gentlemen I saw, a guy by the name of John Curley, who's really talented programmer. He saw me walking around, and I worked with John when I was working at a pizzeria as a dishwasher. And John's like, saw me, and he's like, I thought that was you. I recognize the spiky hair. He's like, "What have you been up to?" I'm like, not really much. I'm just kind of, floating around trying to figure out what I want to do. And we got on the topic of computers, just happenstance. And I was like, "Oh, I've been getting into 3ds Max, and he's like, "What's that?" And I was so happy of the really, I got to find my old demo reel sometime and try and find it and show it online. All of like these really just primitive cubes and like this really weird looking stuff. And I was so excited about it. And he's like, "Dave, I work at a tech company, and we need somebody who knows some 3D. Like, are you interested in kind of doing, it's not video games, but it's, automotive stuff and, engineering stuff, are you willing to learn that stuff?" And I was like, "Dude, I'm, it's going to get me out of crashing people's cars. I think it's probably a better move." And so I ended up joining at a technology company in Michigan. And that is like where my first tech job started. And it was dealing with like AutoCAD and CATIA and all that kind of stuff.
Really?
Yeah. And which is super funny because, during, when I started off, when you jump into like any of the CAD programs, you get all the cool like Boolean and intersection stuff. And I was, using 3ds Max, and I was like, man, I wish one day 3D Studio or any of these other 3D programs could operate and work on the same level like these CAD programs can. Jump forward 15 years later, 16 years later, all the 3D artists now are using CAD. So it's just funny how things kind of shift and change. And, after that, 18 came around, and, my creative energies were focused better at school, but I was still getting into a fair amount of trouble at home and, my free time. And my parents were very loving. They said, "You basically have two options. You either join the military or you go to school." And I was like, "Well, I'm joining the military," because, I'm pretty dyslexic, and that actually, I think in retrospect, really did affect a lot of the way I learn and that kind of stuff. And, I went to join the military, and, I was working out all the time, and, that stuff was pretty cool. And I, they have you fill out those health examinations, right? Mm-hmm. Where you tell them all your, backstories and everything. And, at the time, a big disqualifier for the military was having asthma, in particularly really bad asthma. And, me being a young 17, 18-year-old at the time, I didn't think the government had access to your medical record. So I thought it'd be a great idea to tell them, no, I don't have any health issues. They found out that I did pretty shortly after. And, I remember, I distinctly remember coming home and, when I found out that they were like, "Yeah, this isn't going to work out. We can't have you do this. You're going to get yourself hurt." Not knowing what I was going to do. And I was posting stuff, online on I think it was Windows. I think it was Windows XP or Windows ME. It was the operating system. Yeah, just to date it. And I was posting stuff on a website called 3D Kingdom. I don't know if it's even still around anymore.
I remember those guys. Yeah.
Yeah. Way back in the day. And I started getting in contact from people like in Chicago and these video game studios. And, you know, I remember telling my mom, I was like, Mom, I think I know what I want to do. I'm going to go build video games. And she laughed. She's like, yeah, okay. So you need to figure out a real job. And, you know, you actually need to figure out a career, and it, you know, no fault of her own. Right.
Yeah.
And, I was like, what if I can get like a scholarship? What if I can, like, you know, try to actually make this legit? He's like, you know, a lot of the art schools were really expensive, especially the for-profit ones. But I ended up throwing together a demo reel and got, you know, a scholarship for it. Moved out to Chicago, and the entire time I wasn't even interested in school. I was just trying to get a job. I didn't care about school. I was like, I just want to work in video games, just like, you know, a million other people. And you know, I had a, you know, we didn't come from a lot of money, so, you know, I was working through college and stuff, and I had for the first like 6 months I was there, I had a part-time job at Sports Authority that I think I showed up maybe 4 times for, because I was staying up till 3 or 4 in the morning working on, you know, all these Mac scenes and stuff, and I would sleep through my shift. So,
oh wow,
yeah. So I eventually got in contact with a small studio there at the time. And in retrospect, it wasn't actually a small studio. That was so Bungie, the guys who made Halo, they originally started in Chicago. That group, Alex Seropian was one of the original founders of the company. And after they moved out to Washington, I think they eventually split, and he ended up going back to Chicago, and he started a studio called Wide Load Games. I think Wide Load actually closed down a few years ago. But they were looking for an intern. And I remember getting the email. I was sitting in class next to my friend Corey. And, you know, I was doing a bunch of UV mapping, and I was like, God, this is the worst thing in the world. And I got the email pop up, and one of the requirements was normal mapping and UV mapping. And the manager was like, hey, you know, we saw your portfolio, we like your art. You know, I just want to know if you can do these kind of things. And I was like, absolutely, I totally can do them. I didn't even have a clue, and I didn't even understand it at the time, but I told him I did. And he, you know, he goes in the next email reply, he's like, you know, we got a lot of candidates. You know, I'm downtown and I'm free today. You know, if you can come in today for an interview, you know, we'll get you in. If you can't, then, you know, we have some other people we're interested in. So, you know, we'll see if that can work. And I emailed him, and I was like, I looked him up on, I think, yeah, it was like on Google. And I'm like, your studio is like 12 blocks from where I'm at. I'm like, I don't have enough money to buy a cab, but I think I can get there in about 45 minutes. And I ran the entire way, like in the middle of rush hour in Chicago. Like, I'm jumping over cars. It's like something out of a movie to try and get to this guy. And, you know, going for the interview, and they, you know, they were cool enough to extend me a job. So that was actually the first title I ever got to work on, was like this little indie mobile game called Cyclomite. And it was using the Torque engine. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of the Torque engine, but it was, you know, old school kind of game. And yeah, it was, after that, I got an opportunity to go to Midway. I worked on a bunch of games at Midway. I was on their central groups. And, you know, it's funny, like, it's, you know, one of the things that everyone asks is, you know, I don't think they don't necessarily realize, is the people that you work with today, there's a very real possibility you're going to work with them 10, 15 years later. Mm-hmm. So like a bunch of the guys that I worked with at Midway while I was an intern there, you know, I worked with them over the years. Like my friend Jesse, he's a super talented hard surface guy, and he's, you know, working on Call of Duty and doing all these crazy things, you know. And it's funny how these relationships, they build over time, they change over time, but you know, the first initial foundations of people that you work with, they'll last forever, you know. Yeah. And so went to Midway. Then, you know, Midway started having financial issues, and they ended up shutting down, which during that time, game studios were shutting down left and right. They were shutting down all the time.
So around what year was this, just to give a frame of reference?
Okay, let me see here. So
put you on the spot.
I'm gonna judge it by my age. So I was 19. I'm 32 at the time. Trying to think. This was at the tail beginning of when the Xbox 360 launched, because the last because we were working on, like, I did a little bit of cleanup work on Stranglehold, and then we were doing like
2008, 2009.
Yeah, somewhere around there.
Okay.
And so Midway starts closing down, and at this point, I've bypassed all remote financial responsibilities. I'm living far beyond my means, and I'm working a gajillion hours, and I'm starting to panic, because like the guys who at Midway, like especially the more senior guys who were older, who had families, they took a liking to me, and they brought me kind of in under their wing, and they were like, the studio's about to shut down. You need to start looking for a job immediately. And I was like, well, I think they're going to be nice. They're like, no, go find a job. And I did. I ended up joining up with a group that was working on, and again, I'm going to date myself a little bit, but they were working on Tony Hawk Ride. I don't know if you guys remember that game. That was the Tony Hawk with the skateboard. Came out right at the time came out right around the time when the Xbox motion camera was coming out. But I worked on that with a bunch of friends and a bunch of guys. I actually, my friend Andy Firth, when I relocated back out to Washington for the second or third time, me and my wife stayed with Andy and his family. I worked with Andy originally back at Robomoto. He was the engine programmer, all the way back in the day on that title. And so working on Tony Hawk, and I was super into Gears of War. My art heroes all came from Epic. Kevin Johnson and all these guys. There's so many talented people that were coming out of Epic at that time, and these guys were burning the midnight oil, but they were making just stunning stuff. That was the Unreal 3, right? That was right when the kind of what modern game technology was starting to kind of come into its kind of its own, and that's when ZBrush was starting to pick up. I was posting online all the time. I fell in love with ZBrush.
I think that's also around the time that Unreal started changing from just like a modder community to actually like real games can be made with this, past that one studio's game,
Yeah, I mean, like, I should have had it
or
up,
perception changed, at least. Let me say that.
Yeah, and I mean, these guys, they were doing just absolutely incredible stuff, and just like every other young artist, I was wholesaling, like copying these guys' work. I was just fascinated by what they were doing, and I was posting online all the time, and I was posting on the ZBrush Central site, and those guys, I love Jaime and Paul and all those guys. They, I get a message from them in this is the summer before probably about it's middle of summer. I was gonna graduate probably a year or so after this. I got this email because I remember getting this email and then things just started to like kind of escalate really fast in terms of like my career and stuff. And I got an email from these guys, and they were like, "Hey, Dave, you're posting on our site and we love your work, but it's the oddest thing. We can't seem to find a license that's registered to your name." And I was like, yeah, okay. It's like, I know what that means. They were absolutely super awesome about it. They totally understood what was going on, and they, and what I did was totally illegal, and they could have destroyed me, but they didn't. And, they were like, let's bring this into a more legitimate fold. I think I ended up doing some art stuff for them to kind of make up for it. And they posted one of my images on there, like their top row. Like now it's all about ArtStation, but this was ZBrush Central, the top row. That is what you were after, right? Because that's what everyone saw. And I remember I was on that. I was working, and one of my friends, Mike Hovland, who's a very, very talented technical artist, he comes up to me and he's like, "Dave, I'm looking at your thread, and I type like I talk like a teenager, right? I professional and me do not go hand in hand." and he's like, do you know you're talking? There was a guy on the thread. His name, he went by the tagline of Monster Maker. It was Rick Baker.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
He's like, do you know who that is? I was like, no, he seems like a cool dude though, but he liked my work. And he's like, you are a child. He's like, things are about to change pretty drastically for you. And they eventually they did. I was at the time, my friend Corey moved into my apartment with me. I just broke up with my girlfriend, and he was the good friend that came in to make sure that I was doing all right. And I'm working late at night, and he's listening to me swear and listen to my heavy metal as I'm like working, and my computers are crashing all the time. And I get an email, and I thought this was from Corey, because like we always play jokes on each other, and it was from a guy, Seth Thompson from Blizzard. I was like, I've never heard of Seth Thompson, but I was a huge fan of Blizzard, right? The Blizzard cinematics, that wasn't even in the realm of something I'd ever even consider opening up. And it got an email, and he's like, hey, I love your work, and we want to fly you out for an interview. And I was like, that's not how this works. And I thought it was one of my friends. And I'm not going to repeat what I said in the email, but it was quite inappropriate. And I sent it to him, and he goes, let's try this again. And he sent me all of his work. I mean, Seth worked on Final Fantasy Advent Children, like all of the original core, like Blizzard cinematics that, really pushed the Blizzard franchise forward. And he's like, I'm the environment, the environment supervisor, and we want to bring you out for an interview for a temp job, like for a contract position. I'm like, I'm so sorry, I'll be there. Like, whatever you want, right? Wow. And they end up flying me out. This is the coolest thing. The car rental, it was a Dodge Charger, right? And like I grew, my first car was a 1992 used Chevy Lumina, and the paint would peel off of it when I would drive. So, I show up at, the airport in Orange County, and there's this Charger here. I'm like, dude, this is amazing. Like, and so I ended up going for the interview, and I was so nervous. I don't even remember actually doing the interview. I think I talked, because Fausto was there. I mean, there were just so many people that were there. And, I remember, it was an absolute blur. And, after the interview, they're like, hey, we want to kind of hang out and chat. So we went out, for dinner and stuff. And, kind of toward the evening, Seth goes, hey, just so you know, we're going to extend an offer to you. We're excited about this. And like, I was passed out. Like I had a few other job interviews after that, and I canceled all of them. I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm good. I'm set. And so I called my mom. Yeah, I called my mom, and I was like, Mom, I'm moving out to California. And my mom laughed. She's like, what are you talking about? She's like, you're going to move out to California. And I remember sending her the contract, and she was like, I think this is a real thing. I think this is going to be a real job. and so it was for a contract position, and typically for contract positions, they don't do relocations, and those aren't things that they typically extend. And so, Seth said to me, he's like, look, here's the deal. This is your salary. You got to get yourself out here. Your start date is on this date, so you need to get out here by then. And again, I was young, and I didn't know anything. I didn't know that, like, when you sign a lease with an apartment, that you have to like finish that lease. I thought you can just move out, and that's just the thing you do. You can't.
Is this your first lease or your first apartment by yourself?
This is my first apartment. Yeah. Right. So I contacted my friends. I was like, hey, I'm moving out to California. They're like, you just signed a lease with an apartment. I was like, it'll be fine. I'll figure it out. And I left. Right. I just left. I packed everything up in my Honda CRV and went out to California. Eventually found somebody to rent my apartment, and I'm very thankful for the management company for not destroying my credit, because they very well could have, but they decided not to. Was out in California, and I never thought I was ever going to leave Blizzard. I love Blizzard. It was definitely my favorite place I've ever worked. But I'm a video game nerd, and at that time, there was, my number one game I played growing up was Halo. That was the game that would cause World War III in the house. You know, we'd run home from school. We'd have the old Xboxes all networked all over the house with all the cables connected and stuff. And we would play Halo all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I got an email from Microsoft saying, hey, actually, I think it was from Kenan. I think it was either from Microsoft or Kenneth Scott.
So I just want to interrupt. You're constantly getting work. Are you posting while you're, getting, is that how you're getting these jobs, or are they just hearing your name through the network? Because it doesn't sound like you have very much like downtime, in between these, gigs.
No, I was posting a lot. And it, the thing that's interesting about like a lot of the stuff, like I would not, I think the thing that's always helped me the most in my career, it was never about trying to have the best artwork. I don't think I have the best artwork or anything remotely close to that. The thing, I was always trying to learn something new. And I've gone through phases like this in my career where, as an artist, you chase trends. You try to, oh my gosh, everyone's getting all these likes doing this, or this. I need to follow that. And, when I look back on the earlier parts of my career, the things that, if you want to call it success or whatever you want to call it, the things that actually helped me move myself forward had nothing to do with that. It came from trying to learn, trying to grow and explore. That's where all of this stuff came from. None of the, chasing trends is actually a really dangerous thing in this field, because, if a million people can do the exact same thing as you do, or all your work looks just like everybody else's, it gets lost in the fold, and it also lowers your salaries. There's other things to think about, right?
Yeah.
And typically when you see a flood of a lot of similar things, especially in the technology field, one of two things are either happening. Either the technology's gotten to a point to where things that were once very painful and difficult are much simpler or more accessible, which is, I think, has happened a lot, where I would say accessibility in 3D has grown drastically. Like in the last 5 to 7, maybe 8 years, the flood of information, the quality of the tools they've exponentially increasing the accessibility of this stuff. So you get like, you get a lot of influxes of, different pieces of art or similar things, or, so things can kind of start to, resemble this. Yeah.
So as you're posting things like that, and I'm sure, like, for instance, while you were working for Blizzard, you really couldn't post the things you were doing for Blizzard.
Yep.
Because you were under NDA and things like that. But I guess I'm wondering, the things that you are constantly posting, and that's keeping you on the radar of all of these offers that just kind of come to you. What kinds of things were you posting? And to some extent now, I mean, I think, what kind of things do studios need to start seeing as evidence from their candidates and other applicants, or people that they'd want to reach out to, as proof that they are willing to learn, willing to explore, and actually do stuff that they need, or at least try new things? Like, what are good examples of pieces and things like that?
Yeah, like, it's interesting because, like, over the last few years, like, things have become like doing stuff that's photoreal, like that, or looks really photoreal, is definitely not as difficult as it was, say, 9-10 years ago, right? There are rendering applications that if you put your asset just directly in it and you don't do anything, it's going to look real. Like, it is designed to do that. Game art, there's a heavy influx of scan data coming in. There's, a lot of asset libraries that exist nowadays. And, one of the things that, when I'm looking at hires and I'm looking for people to try to recruit, or trying to, set teams up or whatever, I'm looking for people who can do what I say. I say it this way. I say, I'm looking for people who can actually do the work. If you have a team and you have, your salary budgets and all that, if you're going to pay someone anywhere between, say, 100 and then the very high end, $200,000 a year to do a job, you need to make sure they can do the full breadth of it.
Yeah.
And so when I'm evaluating portfolios, personal work holds a lot of weight for me, way more so than professional work. Not saying that professional work is obviously not important. It's very important. But I like to see people explore, try things, do different things. I want to see not only just the really good stuff, but I want to see the stuff that's not 100% great. I want to see kind of the mud on the tires. I want to see the stuff. I want to see where people are weak at and where they're strong at. And I don't think people should hide from that. I don't think they should like get away from saying, I don't know everything, but I am going to try to do things. I'm going to go outside of my comfort zone. Those are the things that I'm interested in because the technology changes, right? You know, we're jumping into a new console generation. We're jumping into a new, you know, there's going to be new input devices. You know, VR came online a few years ago. There's a lot more, you know, as this technology matures, as this technology changes, every generational shift. If you look back from the jump between the Xbox 360 to the Xbox One, PlayStation 3, 4, and 5, everything kind of goes back and recycles. So the things that, you know, at the end of the day, you know, having the ability to sculpt stuff, having the ability to model stuff is extremely important. And that sounds, you know, like, well, duh, that's a no-brainer. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people who have said, what's the point in modeling anymore? I don't need to do that. I can download the assets from you know, whatever store, from TurboSquid, from this, I can do this, I can do that. You know, the core skill set, the core foundational stuff, that's what I'm interested in seeing. And, you know, when I look at portfolios and, you know, for me, I'm kind of a hippie, and it sucks to say that you're evaluating people and you're kind of judging people and that kind of stuff. But I'm looking to see the fact that they can actually do what they are showing. Now, seeing pretty images is less impressive to me than actually seeing the buildup of the work, seeing the progression of the work.
So I get very process.
Yeah, I like to see a trajectory and a time of growth, because it's kind of like investing in stock, right? If you buy a company at the height, like let's say company A comes out and it's, you know, their stock's at $500 a share. Okay, are they going to go up or are they going to go down? You don't know. But if you've seen a company that has grown over time, like they have the curve is going up, it's a pretty good bet to think that company is going to continue to go up. If I look at an artist and I can see that there's growth in their skill set and that there's a trajectory moving forward, it's good. I can basically bet that if I invest in that person, be it monetarily or time-wise, that trajectory is going to continue to grow. There's still going to be growth outside of that. So I like to see that as I'm looking for people. Now, it's different for every company. Some people just want to see awesome marmoset renders and go, yeah, that's cool, it's great. I think also part of that comes from, you know, also dealing in the pipelines, dealing within the tools. And, you know, I want to see people who are interested in exploring. I want to see people who are interested in trying things and pushing different boundaries and different explorations, trying different softwares.
Yeah.
You know, we all can improve. Everyone can improve. All of your, you know, all the artwork you're doing can improve over time. But like the growth mindset, the constant learning, constantly pushing yourself, that's the part that I'm interested in. And, you know, yes, you can show proper UV layouts, you can show proper shaders, all that kind of stuff, and that's great, and that's definitely stuff that you should show and you should know how to do. But it's much harder to get into the mindset and trying to track people who show that they're growing and who can show that they're going after stuff. And you can see that when you see people who are showing basically everything. They're showing their projection, they're showing their growth. They go from one art style to another. They go from realistic to hard surface. They go from or stylized. They go from, you know, I mean, I like to see the whole painting. I like to see people who can stretch out wide. And, you know, I worked for Valve for a while, and that T-shaped model, that if I had to like put that in as most distinctive of the people who I like to work with, people I like to hire, that is who I'm after. I'm after people who have a strong central focus but can go wide. Okay, good
way to put it.
Yeah,
actually, like you're one of the things you're also touching on throughout your conversation is the value of being economic, not only with like your time, but with what you show, how much, you know, and your resources. Like, I don't know how long it took you to, I guess I feel like you're able to produce and increase your output if you can like learn some of the shortcuts, learn some of the ways that are ways to work smart, not hard. And I'm just wondering kind of like either what can you recommend as ways or that you learned you know, a simple way of doing something, or maybe a faster way, or something that just saved you so much time, or
So
help you put your values and your resource and your priorities.
so
Where,
sorry that, yeah, you got me. Now I'm going to go on a tangent because I love this stuff.
Go
This is,
for it.
you totally hit this spot. I find for myself a lot of value and in understanding the entire process of something before I understand the shortcuts. So, and what I mean by that is, for example, like if you needed to model like a hard surface robot, like like any of this stuff, right? Or you know, a scene or whatever, the arguably probably one of the slower ways to do that is to do that through subdiv modeling, like the old school reinforce edges, cut your, you know, quad everything, that kind of process. There's value in knowing that process. There's value in understanding what that process does so you can learn where to deviate. If you just start off on what is the initial shortcut of a path, you don't know, you can't follow that path back, which actually cuts down your knowledge. It cuts down your base of knowing stuff. This is why, like, when you hear a lot of like really talented sculptors, like Joe Napkill, like he'll talk about this all the time. You have to go back to your foundations. You have to understand the core structure of something. You have to understand the base anatomy of something. And I approach modeling and art in the same general way. You cannot come, you know, the idea of going from just trying to jump into the shortcut path. Once the technology changes, the shortcut's useless, right? And so, you know, as technology progresses, things become easier and easier and easier and easier to do. If you can understand the base foundation of how something is constructed, why something is constructed this way, why we would go through a CAD pipeline versus going through a subdiv pipeline, or why we would deviate from all of that and just go straight into face weighted normals versus doing a one-to-one, you know, model rip. All of that comes from either, you know, most of the time comes from exploring and understanding the process. Now you can just rely on other people's advice. That's a valid place to start. But you lose, in my opinion, a lot of that underlying knowledge. It's kind of like, you know, I tell artists all the time, they're like, you know, how do I push myself? How do I grow? If you're an environment artist, learn how to character model. If you're a character artist, go do some environment work. If you've done all of that and that's interesting, you go do some effects work. If you've done that, go off and learn how to code. Go and change yourself and understand the process. Don't try and just jump straight into shortcuts, because you're only cutting yourself off at the knees.
Sure, you're gonna miss out, and
Yeah.
you're not gonna be able to see everything.
Sort of like you have to know the rules before you can bend them.
Absolutely, 100%.
Do you also have any thoughts on not only using your time well and what you invest in learning in, but like when it comes to like what you really are doing this for? You know, I mean, I imagine you're doing this so that you can one day you can have your actual serious professional job and then live life a little more on your terms and provide for your family and things like that. I guess I'm just trying to make sure, like, what's the why that you have when you're picking what you do?
That's an awesome question, and the why comes into a few different spots. And you know today, unfortunately, I had a family member that passed away, and you know, stuff like that reinforces the idea that time is a very limited commodity. In fact, time is your most valuable commodity. It'll dwarf it dwarfs money, anything, because you cannot replace that. You're not going to get more of that. And that, to me, when you know why I do art, why I'm building an indie project, why I'm working full time, why I'm, you know, teaching and doing all this stuff, you know, it is because of a lack of time. I see every day as it's gone. You're right. You're constantly pulling money out of the account. And so for me, you know, I want to see how far I can go. Again, to loop it all back to heavy metal, there's a band, a black metal band called Dimmu Borgir. They have a phrase in one of their songs where they go, you know, you only compete with yourself. That is the hardest thing to explain to people, that you yourself tend to be the worst critic and the hardest thing to judge anything by. And so that's the driving goalpost for me. It's not what a million other people online are doing. All that stuff's great and that's awesome, but I am pushing myself against time and what I think I should be doing versus what I can be doing. And what I think I should be doing is far, far, far behind where I actually am. And so I'm trying to drag myself, even though I don't want to, trying to drag myself through that and trying to push myself into a new space. I don't want to end up at the end of all of this going, I didn't really go that far.
That's a really
I have
sorry.
I have a question if I can ask, please.
Yeah, please.
How do you find a good balance between working on your art skills and self-improvement and not going overboard? Because I found that out the hard way. Last year, I tried drawing every day for like a month, like 10 hours, and I could not keep doing it, unfortunately.
Oh, yeah.
But I also don't want to become lazy with my art and just not keep continually improving. But it's hard to find that right balance, especially like right now with it being, I know it's because the whole COVID thing, I have a lot more time to work on and stuff now, but I also have summer classes that are taking up a lot of my time too. So I just don't know what I should prioritize my focus on though, and how to manage it effectively, my time.
Yeah. So a lot of what we do is, I mean, there's definitely physical aspects to what we do. Sitting down for 20 hours a day is terrible for you. Standing in front of a computer all day isn't good for you. Whenever I see an art piece online, I see it as kind of a representation of somebody else's time. They're choosing to do this rather than be with their family or whatever, right? That's one of the big reasons also why if I ever give feedback, I give feedback privately. I don't give public feedback on stuff just because I feel like it could be taken in the wrong light. And to segue further into that, your mental health is absolutely vital to what you do. This is kind of where I get my stances on like not doing overtime and not working in unhealthy and toxic environments. Because once, you can have the best skill set in the world, right? You can be the top artist, but if you suddenly hit a mental block, and I hit this, a year or so ago, to where you can't even look at a computer without, having a ton of anxiety, you're not making art. It doesn't matter if you can draw you're not doing it. So you have to throttle yourself. And I think part of the problem, and we as an industry and as a community, we're not really great at doing this, is we're not really great at necessarily filtering the noise and kind of celebrating when people take a step back and say, you know what, I've been pushing really hard, I need to give myself some time off. For me, I'm starting to understand my stressors a little better. I'm starting to understand how far I can push and how far I can stop. One of the most when you hit a spot where you're once you've burnt out, once you hit that and you kind of are able to pull yourself back from that, you will force yourself never to run back into that spot again, because it's such a bad and scary spot to be in. And so, limiting yourself, letting yourself go out, get away from the computer, go do other things, that's totally fine. I'd never advocate that people spend as much time doing personal art and personal projects as I do. I'm choosing to do that. That's my own thing. You should not feel obligated to do that, even though you go on ArtStation and you see the entire world's art portfolio and you're like, oh my God, all of this work, how do I keep up with it? Here's the thing, you're never going to. And if you try, you're going to fail. And you're going to wreck yourself doing it. So, find your passion that you're interested in and push on that. Don't try and push on what everyone else is doing. Don't try and compare yourself to everyone else. And I'm saying that also to myself when I come back to listen to this, to hear myself ramble on, because I forget that. And I know so many of my art friends that do the exact same thing. We forget this stuff, and it can be very devastating to your career. You have to be able to pull back and allow yourself to pull back.
That's good advice.
Yeah.
We had another question about how do you kind of explain, it's from Devin, who was questioning about how do you show the evidence and explain how your process of work to someone who is very unfamiliar with your field, like to an HR person? You know, like how do you kind of speak to your audience who doesn't really understand what you do?
I use analogies. You know, I try not to get too technical or too much into the weeds. You know, when I've had this happen a few times, like when I'm talking to HR people about salary negotiations or what's your job and how do you describe it? Because what I do now is very different than what's on my art portfolio. I'm a weird tech art person. I'm in this really weird hybrid role.
I would actually
And
like to talk about what your role at NVIDIA right now, and then
I'm actually not
Yeah.
at NVIDIA anymore. I'm at a
Well, you're
startup
not-
now. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But
Yeah.
so
And
But
We
with the
talk
lessons
about it.
you learned, you learned at least, or where you see the industry going, because I'm sure you have a lot of takeaways from working over there.
Yeah. I mean, even on that front, like, you know, there's different jobs for different things, right? Building a video game is different than building demos, right? To sell a product. And that is a lot of what the job was at NVIDIA. It was developing content to show how great the graphics cards are, right? And the goal is to create advertisement pieces for those, for the cards, and to, you know, explore technology and do that kind of stuff. You know, my current role is doing a bunch of stuff that's on an NDA. And if you kind of look at the calendar, you can probably figure out roughly what we're all working on. But yeah, I mean, you know, for me, the takeaway and the lessons from some of these jobs has been to really balance your mental health and how hard you're working, regardless of the job, regardless of the tools, regardless of the tasking. But, you know, in terms of technology, you know, you hear there's a lot of, I don't want to sound, I want to word this correctly. You know, as you develop stuff on different platforms, you know, the difference between the PS4 and the PS5, there's a big technology difference, right? Like just looking at the raw specs that have been advertised on the system. The core foundational work is the exact same that we've been doing. You know, if you're looking at, I mean, short of input devices, short of drive reads and those kind of things, the base technology, the base tools, the base functionality are kind of similar. Like the things though that on this generation that we are able to do, or on the next generation that we are able to do versus this current, you know, Xbox, you know, One or PS4 generation, is a lot of the stuff that I think's gotten artists really excited, right? Like I see a lot of the more current gen work, or the current work going down the path of layering shaders and, you know, that kind of process. If you're asking for like kind of more of a concrete, you know, art aspect, that does not mean though that stuff's free. That means that technology aspect for this stuff there's still a cost to it. That cost is still how many textures can you fit into memory? How many draw reads do you have? And so, well, how do you handle that next gen fidelity and still get all that stuff to run at 60 hertz at 4K? Right, that's an exponential curve, by the way, in terms of cost, in terms of performance cost, and also like the actual development cost, not just the runtime cost. And that comes back down into the foundational aspects of what we did 4 or 5 years, or, you know, 2 or 3 generations ago, where we go back to asset sharing, where we go back to channel textures. I mean, we all like the stuff that has kept games running, like, you know, the workflows of keeping things as efficient and as cheaply as you possibly can, that allows you to make what you would call next gen graphics and all of that. It's not that there, you know, the hardware can do more, right? But we're going to fill all of that up with a bunch of stuff. So, you know, we're still using trim sheets. We're still, I mean, we have more polygons, which is great. Polys are cheap though. We're still shader bound. We're still text, you know, we're still draw call bound, and we're going to be, because that's just the nature of computer graphics, and that's where that's going. You know, ray tracing on, you know, current, you know, on next gen hardware, you can do some of it, but if most of the current, you know, specs have the systems currently, you know, around a current level graphics card, mid-level to high-end graphics card, depending on where you're at, which is in line with what the last several generations have been for every one of the console switches. And so you can kind of judge where that stuff is. If you've tried to run full ray tracing on any of the current RTX cards, you can do it. You're not doing it at 4K, and you're not doing it at 30 FPS. You're barely doing it at 30 FPS if that thing's really optimized. And the games that do have it implemented, they have portions of it implemented, and that's just part of game dev, right? It's all about trade-offs. It's all about what you use and where you use it, and where you tend to. We call them perf bucks. That's what I always tell, my colleagues or whatever. It's like, you only have so many perf bucks. Where do you want to spend them? You can't spend them on everything, because when you're building out a game, yeah, you can make your environment look awesome, but now throw in 20, 30 characters on that. Go ahead and throw in hair, throw in effects, throw in weapons, throw in animations, now throw in logic, all of that stuff is an extenuation of cost. That's one of the reasons why in games, if you work in production long enough, you realize you really don't have that much wiggle room in terms of perf and actual resources, because there's other things that are going to eat it up, which is, kind of circles back to why I like to see people's personal art, because I like to see what they can do without restrictions.
Mm-hmm.
But that also kind of but you also can get into a bad spot to where you're spending your entire life doing personal art, and you don't live your life, which is not a healthy spot either. As I've gotten older, the things I've looked for in people have changed, right? I used to always look for the people who were just grinding and grinding and grinding and grinding. Now I'm looking for people who can run the marathon, not just run a race, but a marathon. And when you have a 4 to 5 year dev cycle, I need artists, and we need people who know not to burn their staff out, know not to work them 12, 14, 15 hours a day. And there are companies that will do that to you. And I think it's important that, as an industry, one of the best things I think that's happened is that we're talking more and more about these issues as that stuff's come up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
And I think, oh God, sorry. I was just gonna say, yeah, I think platforms like this, where, some people, getting in the industry just didn't go to, those meetups, that we would hold and things like that. So they wouldn't network and they wouldn't get questions. But I see now with all the online webinars, maybe it's getting the message out.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Abby, go ahead.
No, it's okay. But also just grappling that. I understand that that's been a big question in the industry is burnout, and it's been a very controversial thing in the games industry specifically. Mm-hmm. But how do you grapple that? Because, for instance, there's some times where it's our own perfectionist tendencies
mm-hmm.
who cause us ourselves to burn out. And I've been one of those people, and my company can't exactly stop me from burning the midnight oil.
Mm-hmm.
But I got to figure out how to say, okay, I'm not to the point where I'm amazed with it, but I've got to call it done.
There's a few different aspects of this, right? And this goes back into your time as a resource, and that passion, and that, and especially in particularly in games, that passion, that drive, that motivation that keeps us all moving, right? When you go and you're doing work at home, your personal art, you're working for free, right? That's literally what you're doing. And sometimes, not sometimes, but a lot of times, and it's been this practice for a while, that kind of behavior is exploited.
Yeah.
And so, the way that I personally approach this is I take it on myself to call out the overtime, to call out when I see people that are doing stuff that is destructive to themselves in the long run, because these short-term things that add up every milestone, they not only do they affect you, they affect your team. And from a company standpoint, by the way, if you've ever done any hiring or firing and cost analysis on this stuff, you're looking anywhere between, losing somebody, the cost, depending on the role, you're looking at 50 to 100% of their salary lost in trying to recoup somebody in a 6-month delay to get somebody back up onto the same level, right? That's about the average turnaround time to get somebody back, you rehire and, the benefits and all that kind of stuff. So, I tend to call the stuff out. I try to also regulate, and I also try to, I have a good partner who, she's really good at telling me that, you will die. And that is a big thing too.
Wise woman.
Literally, right? I think it was about a year or so ago. I was maybe a little longer than that, but I was working probably some of the worst overtime I ever did in my life. And my resting heart, my blood pressure was through the roof. I ended up, I'd pass out at my desk. All those kind of things. And I run marathons. I work out all the time. I'm what you'd probably consider a healthy dude. But that stress, it will kill you, and it will destroy your career. So, you know, I'm trying to think in the mindset of not where I am today, not where the project is today, but where I'm going to be in 20 or 30 years. And if you can't type because you have arthritis, because you've been at the computer for so long, that's super bad. And that kind of even gets into the ageism that it does exist in software development, that does exist in games, right? Mm-hmm. You know, you burn yourself out, you can't go and get another job because the company isn't going to take the risk on it. They're not going to take the risk on a burnout case, right? So you have to be in the mindset of, not only are you want to do your best job for your company and for your coworkers, but you have to protect yourself in your career. And that's to me where it comes down at. Like, you know, I've seen so many talented people that work so incredibly hard, but they end up getting so burnt out they can't get out of a bad situation.
Right.
And so, you know, that you have to regulate yourself. You have to help yourself.
I like what you said about, like, you also manage your team, you know, and, you know, call those people out, because I do notice, like, if you have one artist who's working 80 hours a week and then the rest of the team is seeing that, they'll think, oh, well, to keep my job, I have to rise to that level. And it's like, well, no, maybe we're doing something wrong, because we're all not supposed to be working 80 hours a week every week. You know, yeah, we all get in those 1 or 2 crunches, you know, here and there, but that shouldn't be the norm. And, you know, it can, you know, it changes the culture and your office, you know. So
I mean, if you want to find out if you have a good manager or a good company you're working at, they'll come to you and tell you to get out of your chair. They'll tell you to get out of your office. And they are few and far between. And, you know, as you know, this COVID stuff has gone on, as things have become more and more remote, it becomes easier and easier just to keep working until, you know, 11, 12, 1, 2 a.m. in the evening, because you're at home, right? Like, if you're not working, you're at home, whatever. No, you are working. And, you know, my manager has actually been really good because they know that I will work 15 hours a day. And I've had the owner of our company sit down and tell me that if you do this shit again, or sorry, I shouldn't swear, but if you do this again, you're going to lose your job. That's how you know they care.
Yeah.
Because it you know, it's not about burning yourself out for a short-term deliverable. Your value to a company isn't just in the 1 or 2 hours, or, you know, the 1 to 2 years that you're there. It's in the 5 to 6 years that you're there for a project. It's in the long-term commitments to actually, you know, growth and development. And, you know, that's important. And, you know, trying to find that and hold on to that when you do find it is a big deal, because more often than not, you won't have that. You'll have people that will grind you up and make it not so great.
Hey, David.
That's great advice. Yeah.
Yeah. David, thank you for coming on this. I want to be respectful of your time. I know we've gone a little bit over, so I want to say thank you from everyone here.
Appreciate it.
Guys, everyone else, thank you for joining us at this online meeting. We have another one coming up in a month. Industry Giants news is coming out, but I'm sorry we couldn't get to all the YouTube chat questions, but I'm really glad that you guys could make this out, and we'll see you soon with some other stuff. Go ahead.
I will say, oh yeah, no problem. If people have questions or whatever, they can also directly email me. Like, I'm all about, you know, trying to respond to as much of that stuff as I can. It's just, we've had some issues come up today, so.
Yeah, that's very generous. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate everyone.
Where can they find you and either get in touch with you or look at more at your work?
My ArtStation account's a really good one. That's actually probably the easiest way to get a hold of me. Facebook, I occasionally respond to that stuff. And my emails are always really good too. And yeah, I think you guys did a social media blast, so you'll eventually be able to track me down. And if I don't initially respond, it's honestly not because I'm trying to be rude. It is because I am so busy.
No, you understand. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you, guys.
It's been a pleasure. And best to you and your family. And thank you again.
Thank you.
Cool. Thanks everyone for being part of the Bunch of Short Guys interview today.
Yeah.
I hope you got a lot out of it, and I hope you'll be back for the next one.
Thanks. Bye.